On today's show, this is really a can't miss if you're into yoga, a yoga teacher training, or are in the business of transformation. Jessica English and Jeannie O'Neill are longtime friends and collaborators. They are the newly appointed director team at Yoga Farm Ithaca and are shaping the future of this nonprofit together. They recently hosted Yoga Farm Ithaca's retreat at Imiloa, 2 sold-out 40-person back-to-back events with some of the richest content that I personally have seen. And really, the two of them, they're North Stars when it comes to individuals running a business of transformation, but also with authenticity and bridging the gap between yoga's origins and the Western way of adopting these practices into our own daily practices. Most importantly, though, they have the integrity many in this sector lack. If you're a retreat host or transformational leader or educator and you're having a hard time filling events, I often will point to a lack of integrity somewhere in the journey. Jeannie and Jessica show up full of integrity, and I think it's a reason why both of them are so successful, and I'm really happy that they're on the show today. Hi, ladies. Good to see you.
Hi, Jake.
Hi, Jake.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction.
Well, it's how I feel about the two of you. Are you getting verklempt over there, Jeannie?
I am. I'm absolutely feeling that right now.
Wow, that's really lovely. Yeah, it's just, I mean, I think we've talked about the lack of authenticity that's often in the transformation business. And as Imiloa, we're kind of like heat-seeking missiles for authenticity. And I just feel like we found that in each other a couple of years ago. And it's been really lovely to be able to collaborate.
Yeah, I feel the same way. We talk about this frequently, that there was an instant resonance, and we felt such a deep connection to you and to the mission of Imiloa, and of course fell in love with the entire team on site and behind the scenes. And you just never know how things are going to go until you dive in, and it has just been like exceeded expectation after exceeded expectation.
Good.
Always.
We love that. We love that. Before we dive in, and I do have some questions, and I look forward to this conversation, can you all kind of paint a picture? Because in the intro, I said, directors, newly appointed directors of Yoga Farm Ithaca. Maybe a quick overview just for folks to know the established credibility of Yoga Farm Ithaca. And also, one of you is more the front end teacher and the other one coordinates. So I just think it's important to understand the relationship amongst you two as well. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. Do you want to go or do you want me to
go? We can talk about Yoga Farm as a nonprofit, right? Because when Jeannie came into the organization, it was really important to her that she work for a nonprofit organization, not a profit-led educational institution. So that process, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So my background is in education, both public education, higher education. And we both dipped our toes into proprietary education as well. And I did struggle a little bit with bringing together in integrity, educating people who are thirsty for whatever is next in their life, however that shakes out, balancing that with profit margins when it comes to education. In my mind, as a former public school teacher, education is transformational. It can really have a huge impact on the trajectory of someone's life. And to attach education and profit, I just personally struggled with that. Adding another layer of yoga, and we'll continue to talk about that, I'm sure, through the podcast, yoga is a healing modality. It certainly saved my life. Jake, I think you and I have had this conversation before. And so how do you take something that's so deeply personal and put a price tag on it? And I think that in order to stay in right relationship, which is so important to me, a nonprofit overview or a nonprofit structure, I guess would be a better word, meets both being able to have a business and have that business flourish and thrive and take care of the people that work for that business, while at the same time keeping in mind that this is about a mission that's bigger than that. And so when I came on board at Yoga Farm, it was a request that I had that if we were going to become a global school, which was part of the goal, that it become a nonprofit organization so that our integrity can be really, really rooted in who right now doesn't have access to this education and how can we make that possible.
Mm-hmm.
And
this
so
is good. This is really good. So you came on board then, Jeannie, when Yoga Farm was, and I'm figuring this out in the conversation. So Yoga Farm was a yoga studio in upstate New York. And then when you came on, that's when the global expansion started. Is that right?
So when I came on, it became a yoga teacher training school. And people came from all over. At that time, it was mostly New York and Pennsylvania to do trainings. But there was the shift from like, we do drop-in yoga classes to we have a curriculum and we have a program that people move through and they receive a certification at the end. So teaching yoga is wonderful and brilliant. And it's very different than teaching people to teach yoga, which can really change the trajectory of their lives. We could use the side hustle phrase for it. And for me, it took teaching and it took sustainability and education to a whole different level to bring my yoga practice into how I taught any other subject.
And Jessica, were you already involved with Yoga Farm when Jeannie joined?
No, so I was not involved with Yoga Farm. I came on to Yoga Farm about 2.5 years ago as an independent contractor, moved into a full-time role about 6 months prior to that, and then just recently with the changes in leadership, have stepped up into the director of operations. So
congratulations on that, by the way. And I'm just wondering, so I always think of things in terms of patterns and trajectories. And by the way, this is not where I was expecting to go, but now you've just piqued my interest, Jeannie. So now I just want to talk about this for a second, because I think it's also relevant for people who are, maybe they're not interested in yoga. They're just transformational leaders who happen to be listening or watching a clip of this, that Yoga Farm exploded, if I'm right about this, during the pandemic, but it was also right around the time that you moved. It sounds like you helped move the company from for-profit to nonprofit. Am I making the right assumptions here?
The for-profit to nonprofit happened in 2018.
Okay.
And pandemic happened about, a year and a half after we received nonprofit status.
I just think it's such a powerful stand at the top when you said about that, you've struggled with making education accessible and how do you do it in a for-profit way. So then you come in, you have this stand, and then you're 2 years into this stand that you take that Yoga Farm ought to be nonprofit. And then you guys fucking explode during the pandemic. And I mean, it just, I think for people who are listening, I'm not saying that everybody should have a nonprofit or that that's the way it should be, but your intention was so powerful, and look at how successful y'all are as a result. Do you see the correlation, or am I making a connection where it doesn't exist?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, there's definitely a correlation between the explosion of Yoga Farm's just reach in the pandemic, right? Because prior to the pandemic, yoga teacher trainings were not allowed to be fully online. And so that door opened up and allowed us access to the world. And I'm sure that there's a correlation between us being who we are as a nonprofit.
I think so, because I see a lot of yoga teachers struggling, and it's so unfortunate because their practices are so phenomenal and what they teach is phenomenal, but it's like things get destabilized when you start to bring money into it. And not that everybody shouldn't be very, paid very well and profitable and all this, but there seems to be a disconnect in the world specifically of yoga and making money and what the beliefs are there. And you guys have made money as a nonprofit, and I assume pay people well. I don't know your business, but but I imagine, and you're also providing access at the same time. It's really kind of beautiful.
And when the two worlds collided with transferring everything that we were teaching in person to teaching online, and using Zoom and using breakout rooms and being able to create online community in an authentic way and in a very sacred way. The other result to that was that prior to the pandemic, there was a huge barrier to inclusivity across the board. And, part of the reason why the majority of yoga teachers in the West are predominantly very affluent, usually two-income households, predominantly white women teaching these practices, and upper middle class or upper class, is because you had to be able to check out of your life for at least 2 weeks, maybe a month, to go to a yoga teacher training. Often it was a month to go to a yoga teacher training.
Pay for that yoga teacher training.
Pay for the training, pay for the travel, and be able to afford to not make money, potentially, during that time if you were working as an hourly wage worker. So when we opened up registration online, and we were one of the first schools to be able to do it, because we had been taking footage, we've been collecting video recordings, for years. And I have a background, part of my master's is in online teaching. So I was able to be like, oh, I can figure this out and we can create these communities. People who never would have had access to a yoga teacher training had access to a yoga teacher training. They didn't have to pay for daycare for their kids. They didn't have to leave the comfort of their homes. They didn't have to get on an airplane and travel someplace else. And so this huge opportunity opened up, and equity was able to be at least an option, or a little bit more of an option, in the yoga teacher landscape. And that became a huge goal. Was like, there was a summer that we gave 500 scholarships to anyone who asked and determined that they needed to come to a yoga teacher training and that this could change their life, the trajectory of their life. And we were like, we're on it. You're in. Let's do it.
Wow. Yeah, when you said equity, I got chills. And I think, yeah, there's something so powerful about this stand, because it's mostly affluent people. And I didn't realize, I haven't thought that much about it, to be honest with you, but why does it have to be that? And you talk about, people talk about being disruptors in industry and, being disruptive. And everyone thinks, there was a point in Silicon Valley and when I was, back in New York, where everybody was making something that was disruptive. That's the way that they would lead. But it's not disruptive unless it actually disrupts an industry. Like, you can't say you're disruptive. You have to show how and why you are. And by making this so accessible, it's disruptive, but it's also inclusive. And I imagine that's probably why Yoga Farm Ithaca is getting so many confirmations as it does. You guys, not only did you have 2 sold out retreats at Imiloa back to back in the modality of yoga, which is like unheard of and bananas, with 40 people attending, or whatever it was, 35, 40 people. But they were so happy to be there, presumably because they hadn't met you guys much in person. Like, a lot of their training had been online. And so then you're on the forefront again of like merging these two things of like, hey, we've made this inclusive. We've invited people into it. And we're also doing these in-person experiences for deeper dives. It's just so cool. I just love cool stories like this, y'all. This is great.
And it's been just like, the thread of inclusivity and the thread of, and it goes beyond that, something that we teach all of our students as they embark upon being yoga teachers out in the world is to pay attention to the environments that they're in, specifically the yoga environments that they're in, the spiritual communities that they're in, and just look around. Take 5 seconds to pause when you walk into a space, a wellness space in particular, and just ask yourself, who isn't present in this space? Why might that be? And what can I do about it? Because that's yoga. Like, that's showing up to be of use and service in the world. If we all are, connecting to this experience that yoga heals, that we can ease some of the suffering in the world, whether it's physical practice or a meditative practice or a lifestyle shift, if we're willing to play with that, this is a life-changing experience to have exposure to yoga. then we have to take responsibility for who doesn't have access to the space. And is it an able-bodied thing? Is it a socioeconomic status thing? Is it an internal dialogue thing, or just simply feeling like you don't fit into the community that you stepped into? Like, we got to ask ourselves the hard questions so that we can make a real impact.
So on the flip side of accessibility then is also the appropriation that comes with white people teaching yoga. The three of us are here talking about yoga. We're all very white people as far as I know. I mean, we look pretty, yeah, I'm just going to safely assume. So Jeannie, how does Yoga Farm? It's interesting. I was telling Jessica on a text message that Susanna Barkataki and I were talking. Susanna's a yoga instructor. I don't know if you know her, but she certainly knows of you. You do know her.
Yeah.
So she was recently at Imiloa teaching a decolonization of yoga retreat. And one of the things that she'd said is that so many people have talked to her about the integrity and right-sizedness of Yoga Farm Ithaca, even though I don't think she knows everything about what y'all are about. She just has this really great taste in her mouth, which is obviously cool because she's Indian, she's teaching yoga, she's focused on decolonizing yoga, not only making it exclusive, but also inclusive, but also, dealing with the issues around appropriation. So are you guys ever asked, or Jeannie specifically, are you ever asked, or do you have that conversation around appropriation, and how do you start to deal with it?
I mean, not only do we have this conversation, it's part of our curriculum. So a huge part of our 200-hour yoga teacher training curriculum is decolonization, social justice in yoga, understanding cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation, and what to do when we've had the experience, and we continue to have the experience, that a traditional Southeast Asian practice is being held in predominantly white spaces. And, the reason that, I'm a little starstruck right now just thinking about Susanna Kentucky knowing who we are. I'm like, what? So I'm going to just take a breath about that for a moment and collect myself.
Did you tell her before, Jessica? We had this conversation before. You prepped her, right? You told her that, or maybe no. So this is the first time you're learning of this, Jessica? Jeannie?
She did not say Susanna's name.
I didn't name the name. She didn't say.
I'll do the name dropping. Sorry.
So, sending people to her work, sending people, giving people links and access to her book, as well as many other contributing educators that we refer people to. Because, what I think is true is that people look at my face, our coworkers' faces, and they're like, okay, I relate to this person, I sign up for this training. And then we get to be the bridge and say, okay, now go and learn from people who are actually from Southeast Asia, people who are part of that culture and community, because never in my life have I identified as being someone who is Hindu either. And there's so many deeper layers to yoga than what we perceive in the West, which is physical asana practice. We do make it a top priority to name how you can decolonize as a white person practicing. And is it a superficial practice? Is it about the yoga pants? Is it about, hanging the Om symbol on your wall? Or is it about what is going on inside your heart and inside your own personal practice and your lifestyle? And we hit it. I mean, we go head on into it. There's no mincing words around decolonizing yoga and what colonization is. I mean, sometimes that alone is a lesson for many of our students, particularly in Middle America, when they're like, we don't even know what colonization means. And I used to be a social studies teacher.
It's because we're living in it. We're living in what happens when you take land away from a native people. I mean, we're not, well, I'm in Costa Rica, so that's a whole different conversation here. But in the U.S., we don't know it because we're in the middle of it in the U.S. I used to be a social studies teacher, you were saying?
Yeah, I taught U.S. history and government. So talking about, we start every single training with a land acknowledgement. Yoga Farm itself is on Haudenosaunee lands. So understanding the roots of where we all are being watered right now, and just recognizing that, to use a business term, ready for my business term?
I'm ready. I love this.
We're all shareholders in humanity. And so we have a stake, and we have to have our eyes wide open, and we have to be willing to have hard conversations and to learn new things and to stretch. And part of the class that we teach in regards to decolonizing yoga has to do with being willing to be wrong, being willing to have people correct us, being willing to have someone say, I actually am from this culture and this spiritual practice and religion, and it's uncomfortable to me that Ganesha is sitting on the floor in your yoga studio. Like let's do better when we know better. And I also truly believe, I have to believe, that all human beings are always doing the best that they can. And when they know better, they do better. And we get to be a part of the bridge that brings people through those hard conversations and helps them acknowledge where they're internally colonized and how they can work towards dismantling the systems that uphold recolonization of things like yoga, of things like many aspects of the world that we enjoy.
So one more thing on this, because I'm just reflecting as I'm listening to you, Jeannie, and I studied Ashtanga on Maui with an instructor you may or may not know named Nancy Gilgoff. I don't know if you know Nancy, but she was one of the 3 women. I think she was from Chicago. She's probably in her 80s now. But she was one of the 3 women that studied with Pattabhi Jois, the guru or whatever, guru of Ashtanga Yoga back in the 60s, and was charged with bringing it to the West. Now, I don't know Nancy all that well. She was my instructor for years on Maui, but this was not a Lululemon yoga that we practiced in a hut on a kind of a green thing that like a green tarp, like a green covered thing. And there was nothing. There was a bell that she rang at the beginning of class. There were some instructional posters, but it was like in a hut in the middle of the jungle. And I was like, this is the woman that studied with the guru in the 60s. This is phenomenal. What happened in terms of like someone learning back in the 60s and being charged with bringing it to the West, I assume by that group in India that she studied with, to where we are now, where there is, and you may not know the answer, but I'm just curious if you've explored this just as a history teacher and all this, and also, being partners and directors in Yoga Farm Ithaca. What happened between when Nancy studied in India in the 60s to the commercialization and the colonization of yoga that we now see with different studios, who we all know the names of, around the U.S. specifically? Like, what actually happened? Do you know what happened?
I mean, do I know what happened, or do I have an opinion about it?
Do you have an opinion of what happened? I mean, do you have how did we get here?
Capitalism happened.
Like, they were like, this can be commodified.
This sells.
We can commodify it. And probably there was something along that time period.
Well, there was the
60s,
huge
70s.
Yeah, there was a huge shift into, like Olivia Newton-John fitness blew up. It really, really did. And, everyone was doing the leotards and the sweatbands and the, it was the 80s. We're we're going to do the things. And as that fitness, peaked and then kind of did its downward decline, the next thing was yoga. Like, let's pull this up and it can be the next fitness craze. And there's nothing wrong. For me, I just want to be clear that there's nothing, in my opinion, that is wrong with wanting to physically feel good in your body. And I think that whatever is the gateway in, whether it's you took a goat yoga class or a brewery yoga class, and it gave you an opportunity to do something that you wouldn't have done otherwise, and it had an impact on your overall wellness and well-being, that's fantastic. I don't hold certain types of yoga higher than. I think that hierarchy is also a problem, or is problematic. But what I will say is that the second that we've decided that profit was the most important thing, and when profit becomes the most important thing, we have to water down some stuff because people are going to be like, well, if I do yoga, does that make me Hindu? Well, then I can't do that because, Jesus will be mad at me about that. And we need to remove a layer of the history and the philosophy and the background if we're going to be able to package it to the masses. And I think that that's what happened with yoga in the West today.
Got it. So it's not that it was just brought here and that capitalism kind of injected itself in there. It's actually what was removed as a result of it being brought here so that it could be adopted by people in mass. That's really interesting. This is great. I mean, It's not great. The conversation's great.
The same is true, right? That happened around meditation practices, because the mindfulness movement took over in the mid 2000s, the mid aughts. Everybody was being mindful. We were going to be mindful. We were going to do mindfulness practices. Mindfulness was being brought in public schools. And the first question would be, well, I want you to come in and teach mindfulness to my sixth graders, right? So this entire sixth grade class, but you can't talk about any kind of religion or spirituality. So we're not going to talk about Vipassana meditation. We're not going to talk about any kind of particular thread of a practice that can be, traced back to a lineage. We're going to take away all of that, and we're going to distill it down to something that can be secular and something that can be, not offensive to anybody's particular sensibilities or choice.
There's so much here. And yet, you talk about, you guys both said capitalism when I asked what happened or what's your opinion of what happened. And you both kind of said it in unison. And yet a lot of yoga teachers are not making a lot of money. I mean, I also see like this poverty and lack consciousness among yoga communities. And I mean, that's why we don't have a lot of yoga retreats at Imiloa, because we're so goddamn expensive, honestly, to most people. I'll just be very honest about it. But also, it's not just that we're expensive, because here Yoga Farm is selling out retreats here. There's an overall lack consciousness that comes with yoga. So it's very interesting, right? Like it came in through the capitalistic structure, and yet there's this consciousness around it from the teacher's perspective.
Right, because, as you dive deeper into the practices and you are if you are actually walking the path of the yamas and the niyamas and the 8 limbs, you are affronted with things like, is this in right relationship? And sometimes people overcorrect. Guilt happens. They overcorrect and they're like, well, I need to volunteer all of my time. I need to give and give and give and not receive, because there's this resistance around charging money for something that is healing. We can liken it maybe to how I would interact with like our healthcare system. Somebody needs something to save their life, and we have it behind a paywall. That's pretty hard. That's a pretty hard reality to be with as an in-integrity yoga teacher. And so I think that there is this dissonance between like understanding that you have something of value. Your time, effort, and energy has value. You are inherently valuable as a human. And money is just one form of currency. And that how currency is best exchanged is when it is an equal exchange, when it is a sustainable exchange between people, that no one is feeling drained by that currency exchange. And so helping yoga teachers step into that understanding as well of like, you can be nonprofit, and that doesn't mean you have to be, impoverished. And I think it plays into sometimes like the whole trajectory of monks or nuns or truly pious people who are supposed to, we're going to absolve ourselves. Yeah. We're going to not engage in the material world and the physical world. And that's still like deep seated polarity too. Like what about both and? Can we be in integrity and pay our bills and feed our children? Can we do both? And it's okay to do both. And I think that sometimes there's concepts that aren't broken down and talked about in real life, modern time detail. And so they get wrapped up in a spiritual package. Like, we're all supposed to be kind of sitting out there with our begging bowl. and waiting for the universe to show up in abundance.
I would also add that being a yoga teacher is you're a business owner. And being a business owner is hard work. And it is not for everyone. And so there's this idea of like, I'm going to have this beautiful offering that I give out to the people in my community, but then you have to back that up with all the business owner details and moving pieces. And so I think it's one of these occupations, these paths that people jump into because they're so big-hearted and they want to save the world, they want to give back, but they're just not necessarily equipped to then be abundant in the financial realm with it.
And I mean, all people need to do, y'all, is listen, or if you're watching this, like, that's why there are two people on the screen right now. Like, there's the educator who was like obsessed about equity in education, and then there's the operator and the operations person, like Jessica, like you were just saying, Jessica, like, it's what you all have done. I really hope that people who are listening, obviously, if they want to come to the yoga teacher training in October at Imiloa, we're going to tell them how they can do that. But just from a business perspective and a structural perspective, and like, oh, I have this offering as an educator in the world. Maybe I need a Jessica in partnership or in collaboration of the retreat. I think a lot of people that collaborate or that host retreats and they think they need a facilitator, oftentimes they need an operations person so that they can run a business, and it's just as worthy of a role as the main educator in my mind. So I appreciate you sharing that, Jessica, in terms of, hey, you're running a business here. And that's what we tell people, like, you've signed a contract. Like, I'm so sorry if you're having trouble with this or that or your family or your thing. We're running a business, you're running a business, we're running a business together. People find that to be aggressive when we're just talking about what is. We're just dealing with what is rather than, buying into all of these stories. Like, we all got stories. I got shit going on in my life. Y'all have shit going on in your life. It's part of the game. But I think that if people would come out from hiding behind that, whatever's happening, the stories that are running, they'd be much more powerful transformational leaders, actually, as well. Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think, there's also a lot of like, oh, well, if I just align myself vibrationally, the universe will provide, right? And what is true about the universe, at least my experience, my opinion, is that if you ask for something in integrity with your whole heart, the universe is going to show up every single time. But there is an equal exchange to that partnership too, which is when the universe is like, all right, I hear you, and you're going to have to do marketing. You have to say yes 100% of the time.
Yes.
That's the equal exchange, and from an Ayurveda perspective, and we say this in the training as well. We teach a lot about Ayurveda and the system of Ayurveda. We all have a particular recipe. We all have a particular element that is very, very present. And I am a lot of earth element and a lot of water element. And so I know this about myself, and I know my limitations, and I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not good at. And so what I know I'm lacking is fire. And you gotta find someone that has the things, like, this is another layer of being in relationship with diversity. It's like, who's different from me? Who thinks differently from me? I mean, my history teacher self wants to talk about Abraham Lincoln and how he created a team of rivals to run this country. Like, a team of people who did not agree all the time, who didn't just co-sign each other's bullshit for the fun of it. Like, it was like, no, we do things different, and we're going to hear each other out, and we're going to come to the best solution for the bigger picture that's going on. And that's a vital part. Like, sometimes we just want to be in our little bubble of like-minded people and not be challenged or rubbed or not have that aspect to doing business in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's not sustainable. You won't be able to see the forest for the trees.
So beyond the training and the certification that's happening here at Imiloa, what can happen in a Yoga Farm yoga teacher training that can transform someone's life? Like, what have other people experienced who have trained with you? How are their businesses different? How have they changed as leaders? Paint a picture for us.
And I'm so bad at talking about this.
Why are you bad talking about it?
You know,
I mean, I heard 40 stories of lives that you've transformed at that table at Imiloa, Jeannie. You can't pick just one. Why are you bad talking about this?
Well, when we receive that feedback from people, I think sometimes for me it's like, I want them to take credit for it. I want them to understand that we held space and they said yes.
Well, this is the gift. This is the gift of what we do, actually. We hold the space and they show up.
And they show up and they're accepted and they're celebrated and they're seen for who they are. Like, and maybe for the first time ever in their lives, they're seen for who they are. And when you see people and love them and honor them and respect them, they grow. It's really quite simple. It's like taking care of plants. They're just human plants. It's like, let me just keep reflecting your light back to you, because I know that that's how you'll take the next best step for you. You'll make the next best choice for you. You'll stop compromising work and relationships and how you be in the world, because you know a different feeling when light is being reflected back to you. I think that that's a huge part of it, and the ripple effects that come out from that. Like, we all walk around. It's a generalization. I think that most people walk around with this thought that they're outsiders, that they don't belong, that if they walk into a new space, they're the odd person there. They are not going to fit in. They're not going to have the right, whatever, fill in the blank, house, car, dog, outfit. And when we realize that when our students realize that internal story is a common story, and that actually we're not meant to all fit into the same box, like that's old middle school programming we received as adolescents that we can unlearn, and that actually what we're here to do is embrace our puzzle piece, like our individual shaped hole that was in the universe, and then we filled it when we arrived here, and to just stay in that piece, they light up and they feel like, if this is true here, then I can walk into that office building and ask for the job that I deserve, that I can get out of this relationship that I've just been hanging on to and settling. I think that those are the biggest changes that happen when people are embraced by the Yoga Farm community, and that it's so much more than yoga teacher training. The yoga teacher training aspect is because we all have this internal dialogue, right? Of like, I need a return on my investment.
Right. I need a piece of paper at the end of this.
If I'm going to pay X amount of money, I need to be qualified at the end of the thing to do a thing.
Yeah.
And they get 2-3 weeks maybe into curriculum, one module into a curriculum, and they're like, oh, I'm doing this for me. And the personal transformation, the personal development is exponentially more valuable than the professional development. And the professional development, of course, is there and tangible.
So for those of you who are listening then, maybe you're hearing Jeannie talk about this and maybe you're bored of your 9 to 5, or maybe you're even burnt out. Maybe you've tried and failed at yoga teacher trainings online in the past and it hasn't worked. Or maybe you're wanting a more non-traditional spiritual community. Jessica and Jeannie, can you give me a sense of, this is not a 5-day retreat. This is a yoga teacher training at Imiloa, which we have never done before. So can you, without going into too much detail of every day, since it is an extended period of time, can you share a little bit about the daily flow and what people can expect?
Yeah, it's 2 weeks, y'all. 2 weeks at Imiloa. I mean, that alone, like, whew, who are the lucky ones?
I'm going to clip that. If anybody, because so many people want to spend more time at Imiloa, I'm going to take that as a clip. I'm telling Vanessa behind the 2 weeks at Imiloa, regardless of whether you need a certification to teacher training, 2 weeks at Imiloa. And because it's Yoga Farm, we're also making it accessible and affordable. Sorry, Jessica, I interrupted you.
No, I love it. Interrupt me all day, Jake. Yeah, so the general flow of a day, there'll be a morning practice. There'll be a breakfast. There'll be the delicious breakfast that Imiloa provides. There'll be a morning lesson, a longer lesson in
anatomy, physiology, energetic anatomy, subtle body stuff. We're definitely going to go into all of that.
Pose structure.
Yep. Opportunities to get into small groups, practice speaking, practice teaching, being able to lead one another in different movements and practices, and get feedback and hear that feedback and implement that feedback. Like, oh, you were talking really slow, or you were talking really fast, and I didn't know what you were saying. All of those opportunities will be there, and deep community. Really intentionally creating a group of people who are going to spend 2 intensive weeks together, online time together in the hybrid classroom, and be a part of each other's lives, likely forever. You know, a sangha, a spiritual community that's created in whether it's retreat, immersion, or a training, those groups, those little cohorts of people, they're unique, and no one else will have that experience that they've all had and shared together. And that uniqueness brings them together like a family. And so that's going to be a huge aspect of it as well. You share meals, and you share tears, and you share healing, and all of that will go on, as well as some fun things and volunteering opportunities, and sound healing and relaxing, restorative yoga as well. Like, you know, there's going to be a really great balance of our own healing and moving through those layers, and learning, and then teaching, because we got to practice it.
So fun. I love this so much. And I think that, you mentioned that it's 2 weeks, but that it's also, there's also supplemental learning. So you actually walk away with an accreditation, and you guys are accredited as a school through like the highest accreditation in the United States. Is that right?
Well, Yoga Alliance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a global organization, and our school is registered through Yoga Alliance, and Yoga Alliance basically has a set of standards and criteria that you have to meet as a school and as your individual curriculums to be included as a Yoga Alliance approved program. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
Everybody that finishes the program. And in fact, one of the things I love about this immersion, this hybrid that we're doing, is that the online classes will start at the beginning of September. You'll have time to dive into some of the material, start to learn the poses. And then if you're committed to, using the training during that portion of time, once you leave Imiloa, you will have been able to do your practice teaching session, submit the certification requirements, and basically be like, I'm a yoga teacher now. So I just love that it speeds up the process for the folks too, who are looking to get certified.
And they get to be with you in person, which it seems like that's so important to people, because a lot of your stuff is online. So this is just, I'm really excited about this. So if you're listening and you want more information, you can go to imiloainstitute.com/YTT for yoga teacher training, imiloainstitute.com/YTT. It's our first ever yoga teacher training that we've hosted at Imiloa. It's happening physically at Imiloa. It's happening October 13th to 27th, 2023. As Jessica just said, it sounds like that you can start the curriculum as early as September. The actual dates in Costa Rica, which, mark it on the calendar, y'all. If you should go to imiloainstitute.com/YTT, because October 13th to 27th, 2023, it's a great time of year to really drop in, to rest. Tickets range, all inclusive, starting at $52.50 to $62.50. So super accessible for what, as Jessica just said, you walk away and you're a yoga teacher and you can begin that path. So tickets range from $52.50 to $62.50. By the way, while that's on par with yoga teacher trainings, if you were to shop around for yoga teacher trainings, the reason why we've never been able to offer this at Imiloa is because of our price point, to be really honest. So to be able to come to Imiloa for 2 weeks to learn with Jessica and Jeannie and all the folks for $5,250 is just, it's pretty unprecedented in Imiloa's 5-year history. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, and so we're just really proud of this partnership with Jeannie and Jessica. And without them and without Yoga Farm Ithaca, I don't think we could have ever dreamed of being able to host one of these at this price for this extended period of time. I'm really happy about this collaboration, y'all, and I appreciate you both so, so much.
We appreciate you too. We're thrilled. I mean, it was a yes. It was a yes 100 times over. Immediately.
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
Always. And, I have to say, Jake, I just hosted a retreat for 5 days in Italy, in Tuscany. And 18 lovely women were wandering the Tuscan countryside. We're actually riding horses when this happened, through an olive grove. And 2, 3, 4, I think 4 people who were on this retreat were also at Imiloa in February. And we're riding and they're like, well, this isn't so bad. This is kind of lovely. And the second person's like, yeah, I like this. But you know what? Nobody brought me coffee to my bedroom. They were like, at Imiloa, this is what happened. So we're on this tour and the horseback riding instructors in Italy are like, they brought you what? And this turned into a whole discussion of the level of service and hospitality and just gracious, lovely care that pours from everyone at Imiloa. And I've been to other retreat centers. I've been to lovely places all over the world. And the level that Imiloa brings is unprecedented. So if there's a group of people who can talk about the coffee deliveries at Imiloa while riding on horseback in Tuscany, in the sun, through poppies and an olive tree grove, clearly there is so much that we're all taking away from our experiences at Imiloa.
I love that. I love that because even though it's a cheeky story and yet so meaningful, it means people felt cared for. And I think that we all deserve to be able to feel cared for. So thank you for sharing that. That just made my whole day.
Yeah, that's exactly what was at the heart of it. Was they felt like they didn't have to be afraid to ask for an extra anything, help, just extra care during their time at the retreat. Because if a team of people is willing to bring 40 people coffee every morning, asking for another pool towel is like, that's nothing.
Nothing. And they're deserving of it. They're worthy of it.
Yeah. And Italian hospitality is beautiful. And so to have people say that they've never felt so cared for as they did when they were at Imiloa this past February.
Good. And they can feel it again in October 13th to 27th, 2023, the Yoga Farm Ithaca Yoga Teacher Training. Unbelievable. Hit the website if you guys need it, imiloainstitute.com/YTT. See you in October, everybody.
Thanks, Jake.
Cool. Bye.
Goodbye.